About 11 months ago, the redistricting commission completed its work 2 years ago. The new district that I chose to run in, the 8th Congressional District. I wanted to be in this district because in this district it is the largest industrial zoned congressional district in the West Coast.
Wow. Wow.
Take a look, the 8th Congressional District, just think about this. It is all of this, Richmond. We just talked very, very quickly about the history of Richmond. And you go all the way up. All 5 of Northern California's oil refineries are here, and all of the ancillary businesses that come out of that industry in this area. We're still trying to count the number of ports that are in the district. Obviously, major ports, Richmond, and then you go on up, Benicia, and along the way you have all of the oil refinery ports and the like. It's an incredible district. It's also a district in transition. And over the years, it's been a district that's had significant issues, economic issues and the like. And you consider, if you look at the statistics, economic statistics and all of those, it's a district that has enormous opportunities and very significant challenges. And so when it came time to talk to my colleagues and see who was going to go where with the new redistricting, this became my opportunity. I've been at this now for a long time. John Z and I were just having a very, very short conversation about the 8 years I spent as insurance commissioner and lieutenant governor and the like. And all of that period of time, and again this morning on the phone, we were talking about work I'd done way back when on as chairman of the Revenue and Taxation Committee in the state Senate. All of that experience, Department of Interior, working on the issues of endangered species and environmental issues of all kinds, all of that is in play in this district. And the challenges that exist in this district are extraordinary because they are opportunities. I'm just going to put 2 opportunities, 3, very, very quickly, and I'd like to hear from you. There will be a very significant offshore wind industry in California. Where will that assembly and manufacture of that extraordinary and very, very large industrial activity take place? One of the sites is off Eureka, and the other is down off Morro Bay. The ports in those, Eureka has a port, but it's a small port. There is no port in Morro Bay. Those ports are probably sufficient to service the industry, but they're not at all sufficient in the preparation, the manufacturing, the assembly of these very, very large, very sophisticated wind turbine systems. 200 miles to the north of Morro Bay, 200 miles to the south of Eureka, San Francisco Bay. I want you to start thinking about the future, because it is entirely possible that that entire manufacturing system occur here in San Francisco Bay. Okay? You can think it through. We have a steel mill. We're creating the second idea, which is a new industrial activity. It's called biomanufacturing. This has been going on now in the research side of it for a while. My work on the Armed Services Committee came across the idea of biomanufacturing. There's an enormous interest around the world. China and Europe are way into biomanufacturing. The military goes, oh, you mean my Gore-Tex, which is actually PFAS for the permeability and PFAS? The military goes, we don't want all of our personnel to be putting on weather gear that is PFAS. It turns out that biomanufacturing can create the exact same purpose that Gore-Tex uses to make their clothing impermeable without the chemical problem. One example, fuels, materials, that research is occurring here in this area. UC Berkeley, the biomanufacturing, it's also biopharmaceutical. We're envisioning the Interstate 80 bio-ag research, UC San Francisco, UC Davis Medical Schools, and the research going on there, Berkeley, and those two schools on biology. It's happening already. The research, the entrepreneurs, they're putting together tomorrow's materials, clothing material. I'm thinking about those blades that are 250-foot blades on the wind turbines. What are they made of? Now they're made of various materials that will, in the future, come from the biological manufacturing. We're going to create the Interstate 80 Bio-Ag Research and Manufacturing Corridor. It's going to happen. Right now we're looking at creating, across the nation, 4 what are called contract manufacturing facilities. These are facilities where some chemist over at, a biologist over at Berkeley has a great idea. He's in the laboratory, he has a vat, and he's making it at, 100 liters. He's got this wonderful material, this wonderful fuel, but he needs to be crossing the valley of death. These contract manufacturing facilities can go from 100 liters to 10,000 liters of material. Enough to create a market or to buy into a market. It's probable, since this is all my legislation over the last 5 years, it's probable that one of those biomanufacturing facilities, or contract facilities, will be in the 8th Congressional District. And if it is, we now have jumped past the valley of death for these new companies that are out there building these, creating these really interesting new materials and fuels. We're going, okay, we'll see. We'll know in probably the next 6 months. There are some, and so that's working along. What does that mean? It means that we can transition much of what is already happening in this area to tomorrow's new industry. I want you just to hang on to this idea. It's the techniques and the technologies that are used in the manufacturing in the biopharmaceutical is very, very similar to what is already happening here. You look at one of these facilities, you'd say it's an oil refinery or a brewery. Fascinating. The third point is that the biomanufacturing relies on agriculture for the feedstock. We're all familiar now with biodiesel. 2 of the refineries are now transitioning to biodiesel. Probably a third is underway. Sustainable aviation fuel, all of this. And so what we're looking to, and we're working with Grayson, put together a piece of legislation called the Green Empowerment Zone. And that's to support, for the state to support transitioning. So we're looking at this incredible skill set, the incredible industrial activity that is already in place, and looking how do we transition? How do we move to deal with the climate crisis? How can it be done? And I'm telling you, it is entirely possible. The final point I want to make to all of you is that in the last Congress, the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the most important legislation for industrial policy, perhaps since World War II, was passed. 3 different pieces of legislation. First, the infrastructure bill, and that covers every conceivable kind of infrastructure. You know, from a sanitation facility to an electrical grid system, you name it. Water, streets, transit, on and on and on. That's the infrastructure, that's the foundation. And then the Inflation Reduction Act. And that one deals with the new energy systems for tomorrow. Those are the renewable energy systems. Every kind of thing, and that takes us right back to the biomanufacturing. That takes us to hydrogen. That takes us to batteries. That takes us to the electric vehicle systems. Instead of 2 charging stations out here, there's probably going to be a dozen charging stations out there. The third piece, not really talked about much, is the largest research agenda ever in America's history. And it covers everything from pharmaceuticals to energy and everything in between. And out of that research will come new ideas and new opportunities. So if we can do this, taking advantage of the extraordinary industrial base that exists in this area, it's almost entirely in Contra Costa County. There's some over in Alameda, but basically this area has this incredible opportunity to transition its industry into tomorrow's opportunities. As we must deal with climate change, we look at the refineries and say, well, one opportunity is simply shut them down. Stop it. Bad choice. Bad choice, because already we're seeing the transition. And so the opportunity exists, and that's why I wanted to talk to all of you today. I want to hear your thoughts about tomorrow, about how we move, how we take advantage of the extraordinary skill sets that the men and women in this district have. Some of the most highly skilled workers in the world work here today. And so we're looking at that. The engineers, the scientists, the research, all of it's here. So that's my message. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear your dreams. I want to hear what you have in mind and what you think we can do. My task is to bring all of this home.
So, there you go. Very good.
Here's the difference between us. When I have a microphone in my hand, it's very difficult for me to release it. You just pass it right on.
Well, given your capabilities and how I do so, there's something I would never give the microphone.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So, everybody, as you formulate your questions, I want to take just a moment to thank Kevin and Barbara Brown, R&B Sellers, the Liberty Law Planning Company, as our host. They are hosting more and more of the events in the town, and they pull it off very, very well. I do want to remind you that these barrels around here are actually full of wine, so don't play with them, don't drink into them, and they are heavy. John, on behalf of industry, before we take it over to questions, I just want to give you just a very short perspective. You know, industry gets blamed for a lot around energy and saying that you didn't develop energy and you still rely on fossil fuels and you still produce fossil fuels. In the reality, industry responds to the government and to the people of the United States, and they produce whatever the country is requesting, right? Just look out the window, the Red Oak Victory. Here in Richmond, we were producing, at our heyday, 1 Liberty ship a day hit the water. So we responded, and industry has met those needs. But I've got to tell you, it takes the resources of the United States government to be able to do something as large as an energy shift. We can't do it ourselves. We're happy to be the proponents of it and to make it work, but the resources of the government, and I appreciate everything you're doing for us and bringing those. Those blades, by the way, that he's talking about, would run the length of this building. They're enormous. Okay, so let's take your questions. If we can't hear you, I'm going to either walk the mic over to you or I'm going to repeat your question for you. Is there a hand?
Right?
Yes.
Since you're right there.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
Congressman, good to see you.
While you're talking, I'm going to put you at an angle where I can actually see you. No, just stay where you are.
Stay where I'm, okay, good.
But that light, you've got this halo around.
Oh, good.
False advertising.
First of all, I want to publicly thank you for supporting our small, innovative business here in Richmond. You know, we plan to manufacture the transit systems, rail systems of tomorrow here in this area. Thanks to you and Congressman Garamendi, you made sure that there was language in the infrastructure bill to support transit innovation. We've since then been vetted by the FTA and been referred to the Secretary's office. A month ago today, I was in the Secretary's office, Secretary Buttigieg's office. We made the rounds on the Hill. Your staff, Ian and Bradley, were excellent. Thanks to them. We're going back in February. In the words of, well, the world's on fire and flooding at the same time. And in the words of our president, drastic measures have to be made if we're going to get ahead of climate change. Automobiles have evolved, aviation has evolved, aerospace has evolved. It's time for rail to evolve. And we got 1 year left to try to get this done. And so I just want to publicly thank you that I just want to say that we would not be making those rounds on the Hill today after me working on this for 14 years if it wasn't for this man right here.
But that's one of the things that's so exciting about this area is that there's a very unique combination that's occurring right here. And that is the innovation, your system, for example, and then we talked earlier about the biomanufacturing, biotech, and the opportunity actually to take all of that into and make it. And one of the things in all of this, there's almost $1.5 trillion that's going to be available across the United States in this transition. Transportation is one piece of it, energy systems and the like, the other piece of it. It is the combination of innovation, research, and then making it. The Make It in America agenda is built into all of this. All of that $1.5 trillion. And that does not count the annual $850 billion military appropriation. What we've done, I've been at this particular thing 30 years now, is to create policies that bring the manufacturing home. So you take the research, you take the innovation, and then you make it in America, and that creates the economy. And so that's the whole strategy here. Next question.
Wow.
You're going to let me continue talking? Right here. You just, don't ever ignore me.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you. I don't have a question, I have a comment. And that is that, we all represent different cities, different parts of the region. And I wanted to thank you for helping us attain our goals on a regional level. This BioAg I-80 initiative, it's going to help all of us individually in our cities, but we really have to think regionally if we're going to succeed. So I wanted to thank you for that.
So, Congressman, when we talk to business and manufacturers in the Bay Area for exports, our manufacturing base constantly says, well, our price of electricity is very expensive, very difficult to make a profit making something here. How is renewable energy in your estimate, and perhaps even these green fuels, going to get us there so it's cheap enough to manufacture in California?
Well, let's start with the fact is California is a high-cost state. If you're looking for the lowest cost, you're not going to find it in California. Although our energy, compared to some other places in the United States, is comparable and in some cases cheaper. What's happening already in California is a dramatic change in the sources of energy. I drove down across Highway 160, the Antioch Bridge, and I'm looking to the west, and I'm seeing smokestacks that 15 years ago were pumping out steam and God knows what all. That transition of energy is way, way underway in California, not yet complete. It has the potential of being price competitive. A very serious problem in California and across the nation is moving that energy from one place to the other. In the legislation that we passed, and of particular interest to California, is the grid system. And unfortunately, we're down to detail here, but this really goes to your question. For California, and as we move to the renewable energy systems, you have to be able to move energy because those systems do not always produce energy, for example, solar. So you want to be able to move energy that's being created in a hydroelectric system to California in the evening, or when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. So the grid system becomes really important. So that's the national grid system. There was a glitch in one of the pieces of legislation that delayed by 2 years, minimum 2 years, moving forward on a national grid system, which in California is absolutely critical. A good part of our power now comes from the Columbia River. But it will come from other places also as those new energy systems are developed. So that allows us to bring in cheaper energy when it's available and to have 24-hour systems available to us. Critically important. The other part is the local grid system. Major challenge. Major challenge. Any of you trying to hook up a solar electric charging station? Yeah. The Northern California grid system is not functioning well. That's PG&E, and it's a major challenge. For all of this, there are projects, and maybe one or more of you in this room know this personally in your business, that are delayed because they cannot get PG&E to give them the energy. Now, 11 months ago, I represented most of Vacaville, which is one of the hot spots for this pharmaceutical business. 2 new companies wanting to build a major new biopharmaceutical simply are not going to happen for 5 years. PG&E is unable to get them the power. So this is a fundamental problem that exists in Northern California, and it has to be dealt with. Part of that is the CPUC, some of it is state policy, some of it's national policy. But on the national policy side, what we did with the legislation from the last Congress, that's a year ago, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, is that we put the money, but we don't do it. It's going to get done locally, but the money is there. And so, very, very fundamental challenge. There's some interesting concepts going on. How do you connect? Some private grid systems are being developed here in this area. Some of you may be involved in that, but therein lies. It may, even if it's expensive, you may not be able to get it. And that is a fundamental problem that has to be dealt with.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Ardo Rutila. I'm from the Hilltop area. My question is, California is one of the last strongholds for unions. People come here to work union jobs. I've worked in the unions my entire life. I've worked for Overa. My question is, how can you guarantee that there'll be union jobs? I heard jobs, but I didn't hear the word union.
Therein lies one of the real opportunities. Again, 2 things. There is in Contra Costa County, and particularly in the energy sector of contract hosting. And there's a long, long tradition, a very powerful and, in my view, a correct tradition of union. There's two pieces here that are that I would use to answer your question. First of all, the unions in this area are the principal training systems, the unions themselves. You know, okay, the sheet metal workers, the steam fitters, operating engineers, on and on. Virtually every union, including the fire departments, which I'll be meeting with shortly, have a training program underway. And so to be successful, you have to have a highly skilled workforce. It turns out the unions are creating that highly skilled workforce. That is augmented by the federal legislation for energy systems. Most of these are federal tax credit systems, production tax credits and the like. There are different variations on it. For example, if you're going to a solar system, large one, say for an industrial operation, there's a 35% production tax credit if you have that as a solar, or hydrogen, for example. There's an additional 15% tax credit if there is a training program, apprenticeship training program associated with it. There's a third one. You can get about 50% production tax credit by combining three different, specifically the one that supports unions, this was put in specifically to do this, was the apprenticeship training program, literally paid for as part of the system. So those two things operate together. So there you have it. We can't require unions. There's a third one, and this one's going to be a very, very important one. I may go down the rabbit hole here, so forgive me, but it goes back to the offshore wind. I've been involved in that very deeply in Washington, D.C. for policy issues. I'm on the Coast Guard Maritime Subcommittee of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, been there 13 years, and pushing the maritime industry, the Jones Act, the maritime industry and the like. The offshore wind industry in America starts in Massachusetts and now moving down the East Coast. Unfortunately for America, and this is on the Make It in America agenda, is that the wind industry is essentially a Chinese industry or a European industry. There is no real base in America. And so what we tried to do with legislation, 4 words actually, that I wrote into the Coast Guard law 3 years ago. The Outer Continental Shelf is Jones Act, meaning that work on the Outer Continental Shelf will be done by American vessels, American crews. Now, we ran into a problem of interpretation. Like I said, this is a rabbit hole. Going to be very, very important here. An interpretation of those 4 words. The door was opened and the European companies moved through despite the underlying law and established themselves. So that onshore there was a project labor agreement onshore, but not offshore. So all of the maritime industry was excluded from the opportunities of erecting the towers and servicing the towers going forward. Here in California, we're now working to make sure that doesn't happen. That if we're going to build these extraordinarily important offshore wind systems, that it's going to be done in America. American steel, American products, American turbines, on and on and on. And using a project labor agreement, which has already been put in place for expanding the port in Eureka. We can then make sure that these are highly skilled, highly paid jobs for American workers making the systems. So we're working on that strategy now, and that'll play out here in this area. For example, there's every reason in the world that the steel mill in Pittsburgh could and should produce the steel for the tower itself. And here on the West Coast, it won't only be a tower. East Coast, the tower is stuck on the ground. Here it'll be a floating tower. So who is going to build the float system, which is some sort of a barge, some mechanism upon which a 700-800 foot tower will rest? Where would that be? Where would that steel be rolled? I got a steel mill in my district, folks. Can it be done here? And the answer is yes, it could. So you bring the ingots from wherever, and then you manufacture that steel here for that entire system. So begin to think about how it all fits together. And that steel mill is a union job.
All right, John, next question. John?
Good morning, sir. Look who's here. Buenos dias. I actually want to take us on a different path because you mentioned science. Buenos dias, everyone. Cheryl said it. I know we've been talking about climate and we've been talking about environment, but as we go into the winter season, and we go into, we've spent the last few years dealing with like the pandemic and all of these things. And here in this part of the county, especially West County, we find ourselves with this, this healthcare desert. And I know you mentioned the CHIPS and Science Act as one of the historic things. And so I really wanted to see, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that it's not just about technology, but it's about mental health, veterans' health, and healthcare, period. And because we found ourselves in the pandemic, years before that, we focused so much on technology that we neglected true science. And as a scientist, my heart was full that you and many of the other representatives really got back to really focusing on science. I wanted you to maybe talk to the group about how the CHIPS and Science Act really is getting more trained scientists and healthcare professionals, and how that would benefit especially West County, because we don't have the type of medical facilities that we really desire. Thank you.
One thing I can always count on is Cheryl challenging me. Cheryl, thank you so very much. You really raised two very central issues. One is the research agenda. This area has the greatest research organizations really in the entire world. UC Berkeley on a whole host of issues from energy to biology and chemistry and nuclear and on and on. And UC San Francisco on the pure medical side of it. UC Davis the same. And so the legislation does produce the largest amount of money ever for research. One of the things that is, I guess I get to play with a lot or work with a lot, is the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense prior to this legislation was arguably the second largest research organization in the United States in everything, and a lot of it medical, and increasingly mental health. So we have in the Department of Defense a major mental health organization or effort underway to understand it. There's also a fascinating combination here of private organizations. One of the wineries, I was looking here, maybe the Staglins have a winery up in Napa Valley. Their son suffered from schizophrenia, and they went all in on it, and they developed a program that has really fascinating. They spent 20 years raising probably several tens of millions of dollars for research, mental health research. And then they figured out that they couldn't get it all done, but they noticed that research is going on around the world. And so they developed what is known as the One Health Organization. And this is which is now in place, where the American researchers on mental health must work together, sharing their information. And so in that way, you're putting together everybody's best research. And because together they'll get more likely to get it done. And so a shout out to a family that had the money, had the wherewithal, and then saw that get more done. The second part of your question is the research agenda itself. Beyond that, the CHIPS Act. CHIPS Acts are going to play out in this area in a really a different way. Years ago, we used to manufacture these circuits here in the Silicon Valley. That's why it was called Silicon Valley. We don't do it here. Most of that is going to be done elsewhere. But the government is investing mega dollars to bring back to the United States the manufacturing of these electronic circuit systems. And it's going to be very, very important for every reason. That's one piece of it. And the rest of it will be done here. It's part of the Make It in America agenda. And I would urge you to just keep this in mind. I got into a major fight with the European Union on this a year ago when we pushed forward the Buy America, Make It in America agenda. Part of it was this wind turbine industry, but beyond that, we were applying it to the American military equipment. That it should be made in America, ships and the like. And they said, oh, no, we're your allies and we can do it. And I said, your major ally, the United States, if it does not have an industrial base, you have a very weak ally. If we rebuild our American industrial base in all of the various sectors, then you will have a very strong ally and you will have a very, very good marketplace to sell your stuff. But if we continued on the path we were on 4 or 5 years ago, America's economic strength would wane and Europeans' involvement and opportunities here would be significantly less. That's actually playing out now. And so, I don't want to dwell much more
John,
on that.
we've got time for 2 more questions. There's one over here and one in the center.
Good morning, sir. My name is Scott Humphrey. I'm the Executive Director of the Marine Exchange here in the San Francisco Bay region, and I'd like to announce that we are the oldest business in the state of California. We started in 1849. Thank you. I thank you for your question about interconnectivity because interconnectivity is something that is missing in our maritime infrastructure. We at the Marine Exchange are the center of maritime data collection and dissemination in a region. And there are all sorts of new technologies around the world, including new standards set by the International Maritime Organization to interconnect our maritime infrastructure, and it is not happening yet. We want it to happen here in the Bay Area. I believe that we at the Marine Exchange would probably be the right place to make it happen. So I'm not sure it's as much a question as a plug to say, please, whatever you can do, push this. The second thing I want to say is how I know you're serious is that you are the only congressman that I have ever seen twice in person in as many weeks or months. I met you next door at the port when you were speaking to a group that I'm a part of, the Bay Area Working Waterfront Coalition, and I really appreciate your support of that and getting good American Bay Area jobs working on our waterfront.
I'm going to ask you a question, and because I think I may know the answer, but I want you. The Marine Exchange. Tell us in just a few moments exactly what you do.
That is a very good question.
and I have a reason to ask this question. Go ahead.
Picture it, 1849. Okay, I'm not gonna. So the Marine Exchange started actually in 1849. We put the telegraph on Telegraph Hill. We were the signal station that reported to the working waterfront in San Francisco in 1849 when ships were coming in and where to go collect your cargo. We put the first actual electronic telegraph in California a few years later in the 1850s with a lookout out on the California coast reporting, ship is coming, tells all the merchants on the waterfront why it's called Telegraph Hill. Today, we track every ship, tug, and ferry out about 40 miles of sea, all the way up to Stockton and Sacramento, and very soon I'm putting equipment up in Eureka to start tracking along the California coast. We collect data, we report out to our membership and to government agencies to help them understand what goes on in the maritime world. If you want to know how many ships came in, what type of cargo they were carrying, how long it took them to get to their dock, how long they spent in Anchorage, those are the kind of things that we calculate the data for. But in order to do this in the 21st century, we need the ports to be digitally connected, not just in the Bay Area, but around the entire state and really the country. Imagine if you took off from a plane in Tokyo and the airport in Tokyo wasn't connected to the National Air Traffic Control System, and pieces of paper and faxes and emails had to go around for this. It wouldn't be an efficient system, and I think we can help make that system efficient.
Thank you. I wanted you to describe. I wanted everybody to hear from somebody that's actually does this. Now, I want you to imagine if the Chinese Communist Party, People's Liberation Army, was able to control all of that information. That they knew every ship at sea, if they knew what was in every cargo container, if they knew that a ship was leaving MODCO, that is the Army, the Department of Defense's principal West Coast location for the transport of munitions. So every munition that leaves the West Coast goes out of MODCO over on the other side of this hill. What if the Chinese government knew all of that? Okay? It turns out that they do know. They have an organization that does precisely what you want to do, and they are building a system universal. Every port, every ship, every container, everything in every container. It's called logging. And they are aggressively doing precisely what you want to do, and they're doing it everywhere with every ship and every container. And some of us go, whoa, wait a minute. That information is the critical data on all international commerce and every single thing that the Department of Defense does on the water. And they're trying to expand it to the air also. Now, some of us pay attention to these things and we go, whoa, wait a minute. We can't have that. So over the last 2 years, myself and Senator Cotton introduced legislation that is now, when the President signs the National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed yesterday, there will be a system in place to prevent logging, Chinese Communist Party, People's Liberation Army, from gathering that information in America. Step one, stop it. Step two, piece of legislation that we're now moving with, to create in the United States a consortium on the West Coast, this area, yours, on the East Coast, similar organization, that would then be in place to do what Logan, the Chinese program, does. That is to do precisely what you described. That is likely to become law next year. And that'll create an American-based organization, and we'll put in place the necessary safeguards so that that information is properly assembled and used. The little details mean a lot in life. And so, you know, we stumbled across this, I don't know, part of the maritime. In fact, your sister and brother organizations brought it to us about 4 years ago and said, watch out, this is what's happening. We're probably another day or two away from it being terminated in the United States with the legislation. Thank you. I can go on and on and on.
I apologize, but we are...
Can I do some introductions?
Yes.
If you think for a moment I do this by myself, I appreciate your thoughts, but you're wrong. My team is here. Debbie Gibbs, who was sitting there a moment ago, there you are. Debbie's my district director, deputy chief of staff. I'm sure you've seen Mel over here. Mel, I had the good fortune of acquiring from Mike Thompson when he represented Contra Costa and Vallejo and the likes. Mel handles that turf. Harpreet over here, Harpreet's son. Harpreet works out of the Richmond office and has a long history here. Where's the rest of the team? Harpreet? I am at a serious disadvantage. All of you over there are wiped out by the bright sunlight. So. Oh, Eric over here. Eric's new to our team, fresh out of UC Berkeley.
Oh, Barry.
Okay, those are the folks you got to get to know. They're the communication, they're in the district, they're working diligently day after day, they're available all of the time, and so am I, so feed it through them. Many of you have my personal cell phone. Use it when necessary or unnecessary as you decide. Always good to hear from you. I am just downright excited about this district. I really am. I'm looking and I'm going, oh my God, we can do it here. Thank you.
Just very quickly, there were two important folks we forgot to thank, and that's Desiree and Sophia. If you don't mind standing up, they're our support staff for Chamber of Commerce and the Council of Industries. Thank you very much. And back to you, Alan.
We have one